We are in this position. Thank you.
Thanks for stopping. Yeah.
We'll change the islands on the next one.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Everyone for the public gallery, we're going to start letting people in. So if you're joining for the public gallery, just join onto the line here.
So
those of you waiting, start letting you know.
Yes.
So if I kind of go
So-
to, I'll guide them around, don't worry.
Okay.
So you're going to be. Have a look.
What is this going to be on?
Sorry?
What is this going to be on?
ITV, which is one of our big TV channels. Although actually, it'll be on all the TV channels. We're here on behalf of all the broadcasters in the UK. So BBC, yeah, as well. Yeah, we're from ITV, but we're filming this in everyone. Bit confused. Yeah. Quite a
Why would we were the family that had like bags like this down to the beach. So of course I took a fridge to go. You took a fridge to uni, but that made
One
you
more here.
popular again.
Although he is on the phone, but
So some will be arguing against it, but not many.
What did she say? It's total incompetence.
yeah, it was
She used really strong language, but I don't want to paraphrase.
something like
Yeah.
illustration of total incompetence.
Yeah.
I think he's on the phone, isn't he? I think she's going to come over, yeah.
Hi.
ITV?
Oh,
okay, sorry, we thought he was an MP. Apologies, sorry.
do you want to quick chat though?
Afterwards, would that be okay?
Yeah, after we might not be here after.
I mean, now it will literally take 2
If you
minutes.
have like 2 seconds. Yeah.
Community you?
Union. They
Is that
represent
relevant?
some of the steelwork.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
This is the
Easy.
Oh, sounds like
Yeah, I think he's going to come.
just 1 minute. We'll make it really quick. Hi,
morning.
that's worked out.
Thank you.
Hello,
Morning.
I'm Maya from ITV,
Mate,
but
I'm
this
Sam
is
McDermott, I'm the AGS at Community.
great.
Yeah.
Lovely to meet you. This
Yes,
is
indeed.
we're here on behalf of all the broadcasters. So this
Okay.
is BBC Sky,
Okay.
GB News.
Yeah,
as well.
okay.
And so you're here today. You're watching in the public gallery. Are you seeing what's happening?
We are, yeah, it's a hugely important today. It's a massive and decisive intervention from Labour. We're expecting to take control of the business. It's absolutely necessary. There's no doubt at all that the Chinese have been consulting and negotiating with the government in bad faith. Their business was going to collapse because raw materials aren't being put into the site. That cannot happen, and so this is absolutely in the national
Order! Order! We start with presentation of the bill. Secretary Jonathan Reynolds. Whip to move. Okay.
Steel Industry Special Measures Bill.
Second reading what day? Today. We now come to motion number 1 on the Steel Industry Special Measures Bill of the House. I call the Minister to move. The Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion standing in my name, and I don't intend to detain the House for long as we've got an important debate to follow. But can I put on record my thanks to you, Mr. Speaker, for agreeing to recall Parliament today. As ever, you've been incredibly accommodating and understanding. You recognise the scale and urgency of what we need to do today, and I know these are very important matters to you personally and to the House as a whole. Can I also thank the House staff, Mr. Speaker, who've responded quickly and professionally to facilitate this extraordinary meeting of the House, and to all those colleagues who are here at such short notice today. We meet in these special circumstances because the government needs to act decisively, at pace and with urgency to ensure that the steelworks blast furnaces of British Steel are maintained and kept going, saving thousands of jobs and securing our domestic production of virgin steel. The Secretary of State will shortly set out the powers he needs to do this through the Steel Industry Special Measures Bill published online this morning. If the House agrees to this business motion, the arrangements for today provide for second reading, committee report stage and third reading to be considered by this House until 2 p.m. The House will then wait to consider any messages from the Lords today before adjourning again until Tuesday the 22nd of April. I also send our thanks to members and staff in the House of Lords for recalling today. Members may be aware that the Lords sits from 12 p.m. for a take-note debate on the government's proposals before it is also expected to consider all stages of the bill today. Mr. Speaker, I hope that all members can work constructively together on the passage of this bill, and I'm very grateful to you for facilitating this important request. I hope members will agree this motion, and I commend it to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, Acting Leader of the House, Alex Burkhardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I associate my remarks, this side of the House with the remarks that the Right Honourable Lady has made about staff coming in today. We're incredibly grateful to them. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about urgency today, Mr. Speaker, moving at pace and the rest of it, but the truth is that the government has made a total pig's breakfast. Has made a total pig's breakfast of this whole arrangement. The fact of the matter is, anyone who has been paying any attention to this story over the past few months has known this was coming down the track. The House was sitting.
We've come back, it's Saturday. It doesn't mean it's Crackerjack Day. We're going to listen. Come on, Alex Burke.
The House was sitting on Monday and on Tuesday, and on those days, my honourable friend from Brigg and Immingham raised just these issues. The fact of the matter is the government, as ever, when negotiating, makes bad deals for Britain, and it is making a bad deal. It is a huge discourtesy to the House that we have only seen this bill for 90 minutes before we have come to sit. Far-reaching powers are being given to the government. Far-reaching powers not seen in legislation really in the past 40 years, Mr. Speaker. I very much hope that the government will apologise for the way in which it has done things, for the way in which it has taken its eye off the ball yet again, and the way in which it has negotiated badly for the British people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the order for the second reading of the bill pursuant to the order agreed by the House.
Steel Industry Special Measures Bill, second reading. Now,
I remind members that under the order of the House of today, notices of amendments and new clauses to be moved in committee of the whole House may be accepted in person by the clerks of the... This is very serious. In committee of the whole House and may be accepted in person by the clerks at the table in the chamber before the bill has been read a second time. The deadline for amendments to be tabled in this way is 12 noon. Any amendments to be tabled to the bill will be treated as manuscript amendments, which means that only those amendments tabled before 12 noon and selected by the chairman for debate at committee stage will be distributed and published. I call Secretary of State Jonathan Reynolds to move the second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, we meet under exceptional circumstances to take exceptional action in what are exceptional times. Our request to recall Parliament was not one we have made lightly, and I am grateful, genuinely grateful, to honourable members on all sides of this House for their cooperation and for being here today as we seek to pass emergency legislation that is unequivocally in our national interest. I would also like to particularly thank the staff here in Parliament for facilitating today. I would like to thank the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Home Secretary for their support. Indeed, the only reason we can take this action today is because of the restoration of economic stability and the dedicated resources for steel in the last budget. I would like to recognise my honourable friend for Scunthorpe and the honourable member for Brigg and Immingham and for all my honourable friends from Teesside for their advocacy and engagement on behalf of their constituents throughout this matter. As honourable members will know, since taking office, this government has been negotiating in good faith with British Steel's owners, Xingye. We have worked tirelessly to find a way forward, making a generous offer of support to British Steel that included sensible, common-sense conditions to protect the workforce, to protect taxpayers' money, and create a commercially viable company for the future. Despite our offer to Xingye being substantial, they wanted much more, frankly, an excessive amount. We did, however, remain committed to negotiation. But over the last few days, it became clear that the intention of Xingye was to refuse to purchase sufficient raw materials to keep the blast furnaces running. In fact, their intention was to cancel and refuse to pay for existing orders. The company would therefore have irrevocably and unilaterally closed down primary steelmaking at British Steel. Now, I want to make absolutely clear that separate to any conversation about a possible deal to co-invest in new facilities, the British government offered to purchase raw materials in a way that would have ensured no losses whatsoever for Xingye in maintaining the blast furnaces for a period of time. A counter-offer was instead made by Xingye for us to transfer hundreds of millions of pounds to them without any conditions to stop that money and potentially other assets being immediately transferred to China. They also refused a condition to keep the blast furnaces maintained and in good working order. Now, even if I had agreed to these terms, I could not guarantee that further requests for money would not then be made. In this situation, with the clock being run down, doing nothing was not an option. We could not, will not, and never will stand idly by while heat seeps from the UK's remaining blast furnaces without any planning, any due process, or any respect for the consequences. And that is why I needed colleagues here today. And I'll give way to the member for Brigg and Immingham, or I think the honourable member. Thank you.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. It begins to sound, from what he has described, as though Xingye are trying to manoeuvre the government actually into a recompensed nationalisation. Will he make plain that in the event they try and manoeuvre us into a nationalisation, we'll pay not more than a penny for it?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. To be clear, we would always, in a situation where the state transfers a change of ownership to it, pay the fair market value for those assets. Now, in this case, the market value is effectively zero, so I take his point entirely. I would say the intention of Xingye has not been to engineer that situation. Their intention has been to keep the downstream mills, which colleagues will know are fundamental to our construction steel industry, and supply them from China rather than from Scunthorpe. And that would be a particular situation. I'll give way to the honourable member.
The Secretary of State for giving way. Is it now the view of the government that primary steel production within the United Kingdom is an overriding national security issue?
Well, no, I think we've had this exchange on the dispatch box before. I believe that capacity is an important one. The steel strategy looks at new ways of doing that, not just protecting the past, but what the future might be, particularly DRI, a technology I think is of significant potential interest to us in future. But I do think the particular situation here, with the last remaining blast furnaces and the proposition put towards us, meant this is an exceptional and unique situation that I do need all colleagues to recognise. The legislation ahead of us today is therefore a proportionate and a necessary step. It allows us to take control of British Steel's blast furnaces, maintaining steel production and, by extension, protecting the company's 3,500 strong workforce. Now, the bill does not transfer ownership to the government. We'll have to deal with this matter at a later date. I took the decision, Mr. Speaker, that given the exceptional nature of a recall, it would be better to limit the powers in this bill, which are still significant, rather than introduce more complex matters of property rights and public ownership at this time. I'll give way to the point.
Really grateful to him for giving way. He is taking extremely extensive powers for the government, applying to what he describes in the bill as specified assets. That is not, as far as I can see, limited to blast furnaces or indeed to assets required for the making of virgin steel. But at the same time, would he accept that what he is doing is leaving two hands on the tiller in the operation of all of these steel-making companies to which the bill may apply? In other words, he is saying the government can direct a company in relation to specified assets, but it can do other things of its own initiative. Would he recognise he's creating some considerable legal complexity here in terms of the operation of these companies going forward? And why is that the right approach?
I'm extremely grateful to him for his thoughtful question. The fundamental purpose of this bill is allow me as Secretary of State and this government to take control of this situation. Now, the reason it is the Steel Industry Special Measures Bill and not specific to British Steel, as he will know, that would create a hybrid bill, that would be a far more complex procedure, and with the clock being run down, that was not an available option. The powers in the bill broadly replicate the situation if the Civil Contingency Act had been triggered. But rather than seek to trigger that, to meet that threshold, I'm seeking parliamentary permission to do so, the consent of this House and the other place, which I think is a better way forward. I will make clear to him and to the House, I want this to be a temporary position. I do not want these powers any minute longer than is necessary. But I do need these powers to rectify and save this situation. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I'm most grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. Given that the Secretary of State has inferred that actually the owners, Xingye, are not acting and have not acted in good faith, surely the right thing to do is to seize this great opportunity now, this weekend, and nationalise British Steel.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear that a transfer of ownership to the state remains on the table. And it may well, at this stage, given the behaviour of the company, be the likely option. But also, our aspirations for British Steel remain a co-investment agreement with a private sector partner to secure that long-term transformation. The action I seek to take today is not a magic wand or a panacea. The state cannot fund the long-term transformation of British Steel itself, nor would it want to do so. But a failure to act today would prevent any more desirable outcome from even being considered. And that is, again, why we must act today. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I applaud my right honourable friend. Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it is a Saturday, forgive me, I very rarely. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I applaud my honourable friend for his decisive action in this matter. The bill, I've only had a chance to read it for 10 minutes, talks about compensation. That is not a criticism, Mr Speaker, it is the natural procedures of this House. It couldn't be laid, of course, until first reading. But it talks about compensation, and I hear his point made that he's not planning to take over and run this, and that's not the desirable option. But has he done some sort of impact assessment on the potential range of costs to the taxpayer in these circumstances?
Grateful to her. I think she referenced what is Clause 9 or perhaps 10 of the bill, the compensation clause. Now, again, let me be clear. This is a clause that we would put in to any bill. We are not Russia. We do not sequester assets. This language, this clause, this legal definition is something we would use in most standard procedures. But going back to the question from the honourable member opposite, the effective market value of this company is zero. So there's no inconsistency between those 2 points. I think my honourable friend was coming in, then I'll make some progress.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What is happening today is something that mining communities like Swadlincote in my constituency of South Derbyshire will be feeling deeply in their soul, because this is something they could have only have dreamt of back in the 1980s, when they wanted a government that had their backs and prioritised the national interest, and instead they had a Conservative government that sold them down the river. Yeah. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that this is a pivotal moment in our history where it's a Labour government prioritising our people and the national interest?
I'm grateful for that question. This is a significant moment. This is a significant moment because how a country handles economic transitions, it's not about nostalgia for the past. You have to embrace the future, but how you help your people, your industry, your nation get to that point is key. And I come from those similar places. We have not managed these transitions particularly well in the past. And the prospect this weekend of us meeting to discuss the potential loss of thousands of jobs, this is what was on the line. The fact that we do not accept that and will do things differently, I think, is a welcome change. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I'm grateful for the Minister giving way. We will scrutinise this bill today, but we want to do that in a very constructive fashion. But does he agree with me, given the huge damage that President Trump's tariffs have done to the British steel industry, accelerating this crisis, that any member of this House who actually campaigned for President Trump's election and cheered him on has behaved shamefully, unpatriotically, and should apologise to British steelworkers?
Extremely grateful to the honourable member and the presence of his party here today. He'll not draw me on the other principal issue we've been dealing with at the Department of Business and Trade the last few days. But to be clear, the issues around British steel are more than the imposition of tariffs. The tariffs are not welcome. I don't think there's a justification for those tariffs to be put in place. And I do believe it is in our interests, of course, but also the US's interests, to agree a position with us that removes those tariffs to the interests of steelworkers. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and I fully understand the nature of what he's bringing forward, and I also understand some of the requirement for speed in his case particularly, but we can argue about whether this should have been done before. But my intervention really is, having quickly looked through the bill, I don't see a sunset clause in here. Yeah. And the reason why I ask that is not because I have to set a particular date and the government should, it brings the government back here to debate whether they should extend that process and puts therefore a reasonable limit on government activity without debate. So I wonder if you could explain why there is no sunset clause in this bill.
Absolutely understand and welcome the question from the honourable gentleman. I make clear I don't want these powers a minute more than is necessary. I cannot say at the minute, when we drafted this bill, the time frame that they were required for, but I will endeavour and commit at the dispatch box to keep the House updated. Perhaps I may ask the Select Committee for their involvement around that in order to make clear how long we believe. And just to be absolutely specific, where we make an order in relation to control of a steel undertaking, once that control has been established and it's no longer required, we can revoke those regulations as well. Mr. Speaker, I know there's huge interest. If I could just make a little more progress and then some of these matters may be dealt with. Mr. Speaker, this is what it means, as colleagues have said, to be a government unashamedly on the side of working people, and one that will not ever hesitate to take action to protect this nation's assets and this nation's economic security. Now, I understand that some have asked about precedent or referenced other troubled industrial situations. And to be clear, again, this is an exceptional situation, a unique situation. And the question for all members is whether we as a country want to continue to possess a steel industry. Do we want to make the construction steel and rail we need here in the UK, or do we want to be dependent on overseas imports? As a government, we are not passive in any way about the future of British industry. Now, give way to Leader of the SNP.
State for giving way. He's made reference to unique and exceptional and energy transitions, thousands of jobs. In the Scottish context, many minds right now will be very much focused on the situation in Grangemouth, where we know that hundreds of jobs are going to be lost directly, thousands of jobs in the supply chain. Now, were I, or perhaps even the local member for Alloa and Grangemouth, to bring forward a similar bill in respect of Scotland's only oil refinery, to save it, to give him the executive power to do as he pleases, as he is doing with British Steel, would the Labour Party back it in the same way as it is backing this bill today?
Well, I'm pleased for the chance, Mr. Speaker, to address this particular issue. The importance of Grangemouth is why this Labour government has pledged £200 million to secure its long-term future. And it is an important asset. It is not the only remaining. It's one of 3 crackers in the United Kingdom. That's important. But specifically, it is not a comparable situation. And the behaviour of the company is not comparable to the situation in this case. I also want to say to him, and indeed to all members, this is why we fought and fought and fought again to secure the future of British shipbuilding by saving all 4 of the Harland and Wolff sites in England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. He will know the commercial interest was not in the Scottish yards, but we held them together precisely because of that commitment to Scotland and to the Union. It's also why, within weeks of taking office, we secured a better deal for the workers at Port Talbot. So we have repeatedly acted, and we will continue to do so no matter how hard the circumstances. I give way to the honourable member.
Well, friend. Does he agree with me that the failure of the Tories and the SNP to develop an industrial strategy for Scotland meant that they had no plan for Grangemouth? They knew for over a decade about the problems at the refinery and did nothing. Does he agree with me that as soon as Labour came into power, we got to work and delivered support for the site, the workforce and the local community?
Here. Well, I endorse those comments entirely. I don't believe there is a history of the SNP calling for nationalisation of Grangemouth. They were as ever on the bandwagon. I think we would all recognise they don't campaign on their record in running Scotland, they campaign on grievance. And he is absolutely right that the contrast is a Labour government in this place that is on the side of working people everywhere. One more.
The Secretary of State mentioned Port Talbot, and in appreciating the unprecedented circumstances we find ourselves in today, when the government has very rightly moved quickly to safeguard primary steelmaking, the Secretary of State will be very mindful of the extraordinarily difficult circumstances the steel industry in South Wales has faced. In appreciating the £80 million fund available, can the Secretary of State make sure also that South Wales and Lamwen benefits from its share of the £2.5 billion Clean Steel Fund? Can that be at the forefront of his mind also?
Speaker, I'm incredibly pleased for the chance to answer this point that has been raised. So the Port Talbot deal was originally negotiated by the previous government. I did try to reopen that. I went to see Chandra in Davos. I flew to Mumbai to talk to him about it. I kept, to be frank, Port Talbot open on polling day because it would have closed because of industrial action that almost took place. The present government were absolutely nowhere to be seen even before the result of the election was in. We were not able to reopen the deal, but we did negotiate a better deal. And just to be clear, as a result of that, Port Talbot is in a stronger position than British Steel because it has that long-term future in place, because we improved the deal that she botched at that time. And to be clear, the £2.5 billion Green Steel Fund the Chancellor has put in place is in addition to the £500 million already going to Port Talbot. That's an incredibly important point. Give one more intervention, honourable friend.
for giving way, and I thank him for acting in the national interest, which is completely the opposite when the member for Clapton said he was against intervening to save British Steel 2 years ago. Does the Secretary of State think he said that in the British interest or in the foreign interest the Reform Party seek to serve?
Well, I believe that is on the record. I'm hoping perhaps to convince all colleagues today to support this action in the national interest. Okay, I've been waiting one time.
When the blast furnaces in Port Talbot closed down in September last year, his government could have taken exactly the same legislative action as they are choosing to do today. We will be endeavouring to amend this bill to include England and Wales, because there is still the opportunity here for his government to make a real difference to the community of Port Talbot and the 2,800 jobs that have been lost there.
No one to embarrass the honourable member, but the blast furnaces have already closed at Port Talbot. They are not available to be saved. That situation has moved on. And indeed, let me stress again, Port Talbot is in a stronger position because it has that long-term future in place and additional investments potentially there through that Green Steel Fund. But, Mr. Speaker, I think I must progress. I can see your indication to do so. Mr. Speaker, I'll give one more intervention to him.
My honourable friend for giving way and the considered way he's looking after the national interest. The steel unions, the GMB, Community and Unite, they'd like clarification that any board set up that they will have steel workers at the heart who have kept this going through thick and thin.
Remain in close engagement with all of the unions who clearly have been closely monitoring the situation. Again, I reiterate, this is not in itself a change of ownership through this bill. It's a change of control to rectify the situation, but I'll certainly have regard for the comments she has made and the role of the workforce, of course, at all stages. Building Europe's biggest theme park, and where possible, they'll use UK-made steel to do it. This government is backing the builders, not the blockers, and because of that action we take today, we have the chance to feed that boom with steel made in Britain. Mr. Speaker, the legislation we're setting out today will also help end the uncertainty that has been hanging over British Steel's Scunthorpe site for too long. And I welcome the opposition's support today for this recall. But this issue should have been resolved years ago. I also believe they may now view it as a mistake to have given this essential national asset to this company. But I have to address, and I do this as a matter of genuine regret, the statement I saw made by the Leader of the Opposition yesterday. Because she claimed that, while she did my job, she negotiated a modernisation plan with British Steel to build an electric arc furnace at Teesside, followed by one at Scunthorpe. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make unequivocally clear to the House the new government inherited no such deal. We could not renege on that deal because it did not exist. On day one, I was told there had been a lack of progress on this matter to date. So if such a deal was negotiated, if such a deal was negotiated, somehow in secret, I would ask the Leader of the Opposition to say how much money she agreed to give Xingye for this deal, what were the conditions placed upon it, and to state the obvious, building 2 electric arc furnaces in 2 different locations would be more expensive than building one in one location. And given Xingye's request to build 2 furnaces in Scunthorpe was for £1.2 billion in taxpayer support, what...
Point of order. Come in, Ben.
Mr. Speaker, I would like advice on how to counter the points which the Secretary of State is making, given that they are factually incorrect, and they're factually incorrect and a complete misrepresentation of the situation that he inherited.
It's just been clarified by her good self. I can say I can't make the Secretary of State give way when you want to come to dispatch spots, but I'm sure if he notices again, he may wish to. Secretary.
Speaker, this is an excellent chance to clarify this, because if the Leader of the Opposition agreed a deal with Xingye to cause massive job losses in Scunthorpe, transfer the jobs to a completely different place at higher cost than the request the company made to us, I think she should be able to tell us, and I'm more than happy for her to give
Mr. Speaker, Labour cannot negotiate. We were negotiating a modernisation deal that would have had limited job losses, just like we had in Port Talbot. They inherited a functioning commercial deal in Port Talbot. The same was going to happen with British Steel had we not had a snap election. What he is doing now, Mr. Speaker, is the union-pushed deal. They brought that deal to me, Mr. Speaker. I said no, he said yes.
Mr. Speaker, this is genuinely revelatory. I say again, if Xingye's request was for £1.2 billion to build at lesser cost in one place, what was the sum of money agreed by the Leader of the Opposition when she was Business Secretary to build in two places? Give it, because it certainly wasn't in the accounts at the Chancellor. I will give that. How much money was agreed to Xingye to close the jobs in Scunthorpe?
When you are negotiating, you do not have... They're cheering and laughing because they love this. They think that the public taking on billions of pounds of liabilities is fantastic. We had not finished the negotiation, so there was no amount. But it would have succeeded better than the terrible plan that he's got now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe our friends in the press will follow that up and find out exactly how much money the Leader of the Opposition secretly promised to Xingye to transfer those jobs out of Scotland. I think it might be wise, honourable members, on all counts, for that statement to be withdrawn. Mr. Speaker, the situation we inherited across the board on assuming office is one where most of our foundation industries were in some substantial difficulty. Since 2010, UK crude steel production has almost halved, and we know that rebuilding our steel industry after years of neglect will be a challenge. But it is one this government has grasped. Whether it is last intervention.
Grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Both he and I were in this House in 2015 when the party opposite sat on its hands and kissed goodbye to the Redcar blast furnace, and with it the state-of-the-art coke ovens that could have resolved this situation today. But before he sits down, could he say something about the Xingye activities at Lackenby and at Skinnygrove and how they will be impacted by his announcement today?
I'm really grateful he's been able to put that point on the record for his community and to avoid the kind of situation we've seen in lots of industrial communities, to be frank, over the years. This is why we take this action today in the national interest, to provide that bridge, that possibility to the future. And specifically, in relation to the downstream mills, I mean, look, even if we were willing to accept a situation where they were supplied from a foreign country, in this case, the confidence of consumers, of businesses around that would surely be put at risk, and it would bring into question the entirety of British Steel's workforce and business, and a huge part of our strategic assets. And that is, again, why this decisive action today is necessary. I'm going to continue, Mr. Speaker. I'm conscious of the speakers. OK, I'll give way to them.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He said that steel production is strategically important, and I agree with him. He said we should be avoiding having to be reliant on imports, and I agree with him. But his government blocked production of the raw material metallurgic coal mine in the northwest. So will he now be going back to his colleagues in government and the company to encourage them to reapply so we can have security not just of steel making but of the raw materials that we need to make?
Sure, though, the company themselves brought into question whether that coal was the right grade for blast furnace supplies. And I remember the debate, several debates in this place about that. I should also make clear, and I think honourable members understand this, we're talking about two blast furnaces that date from the 1930s and the 1950s. We've got to be looking to the future as well, to new technology, to new investments, and that is crucially why having the dedicated resources this government has put in to steel is why we've got the chance to look with optimism to the future. Our steel industry in the UK is an outlier in the sense it is a much smaller proportion of our overall economy than you'd find in any comparable major economy. So, of course, there is potential there, but we should look to the future, and I'd be more than willing to work with her as a local MP to do so. Mr. Speaker, one last time, then I'll go.
Secretary of State for giving way. Will he, once he's got the powers in this bill, I really would urge him to use them decisively and swiftly. But then we need to look to the future, as he said. Once we've secured Scunthorpe's future, we need to discuss what happens next, and that's clean energy and investing in that global clean energy, which the UK really could succeed. But will he agree with me that the people of Scunthorpe have upheld their end of the bargain for decades, and now it's time that we in this House make sure that we honour our end too?
I think honourable members put that extremely well, if I may say. The people who have held the backbone of construction steel in the UK for decades deserve better treatment than they would have had if Parliament was not recalled today to take this action, and I believe we should all bear that in mind. Mr. Speaker, whether it is at Port Talbot, whether it is via our upcoming steel strategy, whether it's via our work to improve public procurement, or in the introduction of our industrial strategy to tackle the most thorny issues of industrial competitiveness. Where others have shied away, this government has stepped up. Let me conclude by saying, Mr. Speaker, steel is fundamental to Britain's industrial strength, to our security, and to our identity as a primary global power. Today's legislation will help ensure that we can retain that steelmaking capability here in the UK, both now and for years to come. For British workers' security, for British industry's future, and without hesitation in our national interest, and for the workers of British Steel, and for their families, this action today is essential, and I commend this bill to the House.
The question is the bill will now be read a second time. Shows Secretary of State Andrew Griffiths.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for taking the time to brief me last night ahead of today's sittings and for sight of today's statement. Mr. Speaker, to fail to prepare is to prepare to fail. What a way to proceed. Only the sixth occasion since the end of the Second World War, recalling Parliament to debate a bill published only 90 minutes ago. This would be conduct unbecoming of a parish council. Our country, our economy, this Parliament all deserve better. And it's why the amendment in my name at least puts a sunset on today's bill, and I hope the government will accept that. Mr. Speaker, today is not a failure by the steel workers of Scunthorpe and elsewhere, their families or the community. They've toiled for generations to ensure we have the primary steel we need for our structures, our safety and our security. This is a failure on the government's watch. Let's be crystal clear what today means. We are entering a tunnel with only one exit. This is a botched nationalisation plan, revealing the government has no plan. In government, we acted to secure Port Talbot and were negotiating a plan, including British Steel's preferred option of an electric arc furnace in Teesside. That would have limited job losses and kept Scunthorpe running in transition. Once again, when Labour negotiates, Britain loses. The Chagos Islands, US tariffs, the train drivers, and now this latest crisis. Mr. Speaker, a bad toolmaker blames his tools. But this time, they've only themselves to blame. I'll give way.
I think the Shadow Minister...
Right. Sorry, Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. But doesn't he not accept that in the years between 2010 and 2023, steel production in this country fell by 50%, 42-50%. Does that not actually underline the lack of strategy under the last government?
Mr. Speaker, I'll talk about the difficulties facing steel around the world. But let's just be clear, Mr. Speaker. let's be clear what is happening today. And Mr. Speaker, the British people must not have lost their winter fuel allowance and their disability benefits in order that China can walk away from its liabilities, leaving British taxpayers picking up the bills. Mr. Speaker, steel needs energy, and energy needs steel. No one denies that steelmaking has been difficult for some time, but Scunthorpe is the victim of a dishonesty that pretends it is better for the environment to ship coke halfway around the planet than from down the road, and an energy policy that has driven costs higher than any competing nation. No one is more responsible for this than the Energy Secretary and the Prime Minister who appointed him. Millions of other businesses. I'll give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend.
Shh. Graham Stewart, those who keep intervening will go down the list, just to remind, so everybody gets a fair chance. Graham Stewart.
I assume that applies after the warning, Mr. Speaker.
I'm Johnny.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have a government which is shipping coking coal, I believe, just off the coast of Lincolnshire today, from Japan, where it was perfectly possible to have the greenest production of coking coal in the world, in Cumbria, with thousands of jobs. And isn't it a disgrace that this government turns it back on jobs in Cumbria and indeed in the North Sea, because it puts ideology ahead of practicality and even ahead of the environment?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and sad to say, Scunthorpe is the victim of exactly that policy, putting ideology before the interests of British interests. Mr. Speaker, now we'll make some progress. Millions of other businesses are also struggling with their energy bills. It's why the Chancellor's tax choices have been so devastating. Steel may be the first domino to topple, but glass, chemicals, cars and concrete are other industries at risk. Does the Prime Minister envisage a whole series of Saturday sittings, or will he change course today and cut energy costs now, not in 10 years' time when it's too late?
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. We are hearing about the efforts of the previous government to save British steel, and we have found somewhat a confusing account about the deal that the now Shadow Leader of the opposition has negotiated. If such a deal existed, can we perhaps see a record of any of that?
Well, I think my colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Saffron Walden, has been extremely clear that the deal was being negotiated. And the point about a deal being negotiated is that that deal will be concluded after the election. Mr. Speaker, let's make some progress. Mr. Speaker, it didn't need to be this way. The Honourable Member for Brigham-Ingham has been warning of a growing threat since last September. The Mayor of Teesside has been asking the government to present their plan for steel for months. Rob Waltham, the leader of North Lincolnshire Council, has done all he can to support steel making in Scunthorpe. And on the 4th of April, Ed Conway of Sky News showed the world that we were just days away from the risk of furnaces shutting down. But the government didn't listen and they didn't act. It's been almost 10 days since Parliament debated a substantive piece of government business. Rather than this rushed minute-to-midnight bill, we could have used that time for proper debate, a proper process and proper scrutiny. It's indefensible incompetence. Despite years to prepare, it's clear they came into office with no plan. There is no steel strategy, there is no industrial strategy, there is no export strategy, and now we have this botched nationalisation. The Secretary of State says his preference is to find a commercial partner. But let's be serious. Does the government think this is likely after attacking business with a 25 billion jobs tax and his bill to create the most hostile environment for employers since the 1970s? In case the Chancellor hasn't noticed, on her watch, All of the flow is investors leaving this country. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. I'm still a little confused as to what the deal was that the last government negotiated. And seeing as the leader couldn't answer it and you didn't respond, I just wondered if you could please just clarify that situation for the House.
Thank you. Well, I'm not surprised the Honourable Lady's a little confused. As I said, the government has failed to lay out its plan, and it's failed to afford this House the opportunity to debate their plans. And Mr. Speaker, everything we have heard this morning says the government hasn't really thought this through. Steel making is complex, intense, it's highly operational. Iron ore has to reach thousands of degrees to become molten iron. It's a dangerous process, and there is a serious risk to health. Yet in Birmingham, Labour struggled to collect the bins. From midnight, sit down. From midnight, the Chancellor will be standing behind the payroll, settling every bill with every supplier, even if they're in arrears. If these decisions no longer sit with the plant owner, where does the buck stop? Old Admiralty Building? The Treasury? Number 10. And how can other steel providers have any confidence in the impartiality of the government's steel strategy if the umpire is now on the pitch? What assessment has the government made of the impact of this bill on public finances? There is no impact assessment. The government's been talking to British Steel for 9 months. They've put at least 500 million of taxpayers' money on the table. Surely by now, he and his officials have a comprehensive understanding of the costs of the actions he is asking us to vote on. What disrespect to this House for the government to come along today to recall Parliament after 9 months in which they failed to land a deal and ask us for a blank cheque. This is no way to run a corner shop, let alone the country. Has anyone in government asked the ONS? If they sit down, they might learn something. Has anyone in government?
You'll sit down, actually. Can I just say, the member, it's his choice whether he gives way. Don't keep hanging around. I'm doing that.
Well, perhaps they'd like. I'll take an intervention if they want to answer this question, which is: has anyone in government asked the ONS whether, as a result of the powers that are being taken in this bill, British Steel will from today be classified as publicly owned, whether it's been formally nationalised or not? No answers. Mr. Speaker, the market knows. The market knows. He's a bit slow.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. It's a very relevant question to ask, given he was Boris Johnson's business advisor when the Xinjiang deal was being negotiated. Can he tell us what advice he gave to Boris Johnson about whether to accept that deal?
Well, disappointingly, no answer to my question about the ONS and the important question of whether this asset sits on the government's balance sheet tonight or not. But perhaps in winding up, the Minister will provide an answer to that important question that affects the nation's finances. Mr. Speaker, the markets know, the world knows, and we know the Chancellor's headroom was inadequate from the very moment she sat down about her last emergency budget. Only this week, the Bank of England took the unprecedented step of cancelling the planned sale of government bonds. Today's botched nationalisation will further unsettle international markets. So can the government tell us when the Chancellor will be presenting her next emergency budget and what plans she has to update the markets? So there we are, Mr. Speaker. A disrespect of this House. The government has treated Parliament with disdain. 9 months of dither and delay. A botched nationalisation of steelmaking with the British taxpayer on the hook. It's crystal clear. When Labour negotiates, Britain loses. This is not a serious government. It's a government shaped by events, not one in control of them. It's a government by sulky teenager, not sharing their plans, not answering the question, and when it goes wrong, it's everyone's fault but theirs.
The Select Committee. Are you voting against it? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if you'll forgive me for returning the debate to the bill in front of us today. Because this bill is about saving British steel. That's what this debate should be focused on today, and I want to commend the Secretary of State for bringing forward the powers to achieve that goal. The Secretary of State has today acted with decisiveness, with speed and with certainty. I want to thank him for the bill that he's presented today. I think he has acted in the national interest. He's acted to safeguard our economic security, and I'm delighted that he has acted in line with the advice of the Select Committee tabled with him 10 days ago. As we know, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't always happen. So we urged the Secretary of State to maximise pressure on British Steel's owners, not to do what was easy, but to do what was right. And today the Secretary of State has returned to the House with a bill asking for the powers to do exactly that. Mr. Speaker, this legislation matters not simply because it protects 3,700 jobs in Scunthorpe, not simply because it protects 37,000 jobs in the steel supply chain across our nation, not simply because it safeguards nearly £2 billion worth of economic output. This bill matters today because it defends our economy, it defends our security, and therefore it defends our future. So at the heart of this debate, Mr. Speaker, the heart of this debate is actually a very simple question. Can we entrust a critical national asset to a company that we do not trust? I say no. We cannot, we must not, and we dare not. We are presented with a very simple challenge. In British Steel's owners, we have a company in possession of an asset that we need, yet it is a partner that we do not trust. In a world where threats to our economic security multiply each day, we cannot allow that risk to fester at the heart of our industrial core. I give way.
Very much. I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I wonder if he would agree with me that there is a wider issue at stake with all of our energy security and national security. We've seen what could go wrong with a company that we do not trust, which is Chinese, and we see the Chinese influence in other vital sectors, particularly our energy industry, increasing. Should this not underline our concern and act as a warning that we do not want the Chinese to have control of our energy supply?
To answer in this House a very basic question, which is, if we cannot trust a company, can we entrust a capability that we need to it when it is so vital to our strength? It's one of the reasons that our committee has set up a new subcommittee on economic security. We will be reporting back to the House on the state of economic security in our country before the summer recess, and I look forward to her comments on that report. But the general point, Mr. Speaker, that I want to land is this. What we value most cannot be entrusted to those we distrust most. The timing of this bill today is critical. We live in an age of intensifying insecurity. President Putin's violence is unabated. China's military build-up is unabated. And now President Trump threatens to upend the free trading system. In such a world, to surrender our ability to make primary steel would not be a misfortune, it would be negligence. I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. I thank the honourable member for giving way, and he will know on the committee we've spoken to defence companies about how necessary it is to not rely on imports at a time like this. So does he agree with me that national resilience and defence rely on an industrial security?
Honourable friend is absolutely right. And what we need to remember in this debate today is that
95% of our rail infrastructure is made by British Steel. British Steel supplies 3/4 of every major construction project in this country. We're about to invest, thanks to the Chancellor, £10 billion in the rearmament of this country. Much of what we need to put in place in the future will be made by British Steel. How can we afford to let British Steel go out of business today? How can we vote against the bill which is on the table in front of us today? British Steel is not simply a pillar of British industry, it is a cornerstone of our economic security. I give way to the honourable member.
To the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Would he agree with me that this argument, as a card-carrying advocate of industrial strategy, it applies also to some of our key other high-growth sectors, in fusion, in quantum, in space? We have got to accept that the days of easy globalisation are over and be a bit more strategic about how we support our emerging industries.
Mr. Speaker, you know that I could answer that question all day, and you will rule me out of order, and I'm going to confine my remarks to the bill that is on the table in front of us. But I agree with the honourable gentleman. He is absolutely right, and that is why we have got to work harder across this House to build a consensus about the big calls that we need to get right for our future. Right now, British Steel, I will in a moment, British Steel faces significant headwinds. Not just Chinese steelmakers flooding the market, but the new 25% tariff that we have from the United States. And we've got to now rise to the challenge of decarbonisation. And yet, in this House, we have got to keep our eyes on the prize ahead of us. The Chancellor has just committed £100 billion worth of capital investment. We are building affordable homes at a pace not seen in decades. We are investing £10 billion in defence. There is a market to seize, but only if we have the means to supply it. British Steel cannot profit from Britain's future if Chinese firms are allowed to kill it today. Give way to the honourable member.
I thank the member for giving way, and I agree with him that we need a steel industry in Britain, and I agree with him that we need to invest in it. Does he not think that today we could be going a bit further, and instead of this temporary measure, actually taking the whole steel industry into public ownership, so it can be what it has always been, the bedrock of manufacturing industry in Britain, and give us security for the future, free from market forces?
Well, the right honourable gentleman may well be right, but this is the second key point that I wanted to just land, Mr. Speaker, because the truth is, Jingyi is a mess. The reality is this company has failed to publish accounts since 2021. 2 auditors have resigned. One cited material concerns about its ability to remain a going concern. Inventories can't be verified. Cash flow statements are missing. The company is not acting in good faith, and that is why the Secretary of State is right to take the powers that he's asking for today. I will in a moment. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is clear that the escalating trade war between China and the United States now created the imperative to act today. It is clear that Zhengyi was about to move primary steelmaking capability from Scunthorpe back to China and merely use the downstream mills in Scunthorpe. That may have been good for China's economic security, but it is not good for Britain's national security, and that is why we need to give the Secretary of State the powers that he is asking for today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, the options on the table are very simple. The Secretary of State could do nothing, and they would watch the furnaces close. They could hope, but hope is not a strategy. Or they could act, as they have done today. They have acted with strength, decision, for the long-term interest in our country, and this House should give the Secretary of State its full and unabated support.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recalling Parliament today is absolutely the right thing to do. But to be frank, it is extraordinary that we find ourselves in a situation where our sovereign steel industry is in such peril as a result of the Conservatives' failings, and where the Labour government is now trying to give itself unprecedented powers. Thinking back, it is quite astounding that even after British Steel was sold for £1, even after British Steel entered insolvency, even after the government's insolvency service temporarily ran the firm, the Conservatives pressed ahead to erect more trade barriers through their botched Brexit deal. They scrapped the Industrial Strategy Council and allowed the sale of the steel plant to a Chinese firm, which now, according to ministers, is refusing to negotiate in good faith to at least keep the plant going. The Conservatives were asleep at the wheel. They failed to tackle energy costs, they failed to tackle business rates, and now Trump's tariffs and his contagious protectionism is now the straw that has broken the camel's back. I will.
Good on Lib Dems, thank you. Would the Honourable Lady also agree with me in 2015 they were in government when the steelworks in Redcar closed and thousands of people lost jobs?
As he will know, the three things that I just outlined, British Steel being sold for £1, entering insolvency and the government's insolvency service being temporarily running the firm, all happened in 2019. Mr. Speaker, with Putin's barbaric war in Europe and Donald Trump's disastrous tariffs causing economic turmoil around the world, we must secure the future of steel production here at home. We Liberal Democrats welcome the sense of seriousness and urgency shown by the government in recalling Parliament. We must work together to rescue our steel sector and the tens of thousands of jobs that rely on it, directly and indirectly. But under the terms of this bill, the Secretary of State is giving himself huge and unconstrained powers which could set a very dangerous precedent. I urge the Secretary of State, in the strongest possible terms, to make a simple commitment today that the powers that he is giving himself will be repealed as soon as possible, within 6 months at the latest, and if they are still required after that, whether he will come back to this House to ask for another vote if he wants to extend them.
Well, the honourable member for giving way, and as I've tried to articulate in my opening speech and second reading, I understand the gravity of it. I think also that puts some context to the demands for further powers to be included in this bill. I think the limitation, wide as they are, is the right measure, but I'll give her that absolute assurance and I'll seek to do exactly that.
I'm incredibly grateful to the Minister, for Secretary of State, for giving that assurance. And it is important for the very reasons that I will outline in terms of what the powers actually do. Clause 34A gives the Secretary of State the power to break into anywhere to seize assets. Clause 34C gives the Secretary of State the power to take whatever steps that he considers appropriate, not what a court or a reasonable person might consider to be appropriate, but what the Secretary of State considers to be appropriate to seize or secure the assets. Under the section on offences, Clause 4.3 makes it a crime for anyone not to follow the instructions of the Secretary of State or to refuse to assist the Secretary of State in taking those steps without a reasonable excuse. But a reasonable excuse is not defined in this bill, no examples are given, and quite frankly, it is very hard to work out what defence of a reasonable excuse might be accepted, given that under 34C, it is whatever the Secretary of State himself considers to be okay. In the section on indemnities, Mr. Speaker, Clause 6.1 appears to give the Secretary of State and potentially any other person who is with him, a police officer, a civil servant, border force, immunity from prosecution for using any of these wide-ranging powers. These powers are unprecedented and they are unconstrained, and I am grateful to the Secretary of State for saying that is precisely why he will intend to repeal these powers as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, more broadly, the government must now also bring forward plans to guarantee the future of this vital sector. We know the steel industry is surrounded by crippling uncertainty, and after decades of underinvestment and a shocking indifference to our sovereign economic security, the previous Conservative government has left our sovereign national capacity on steel diminished and endangered. Yet there is no chance that the UK demand for steel will disappear. How absurd, how irresponsible is this, that we have a sustainable and enduring long-term market for British steel, but that our supply could keel over in a matter of days because of the failures of that failed party. So looking ahead, Mr. Speaker, let us remember that saving Scunthorpe is necessary but not sufficient. There have been very significant discussions about the future ownership structure of this company, and given the very precarious fiscal position that the government finds itself in, it is important that all options on ownership are put on the table so that this House can take an informed decision about what it means for the public finances. So I hope that the government will make a commitment that in the coming weeks they will bring forward a report which will set out options for future ownership of the plant. Looking ahead, Mr. Speaker, there are many big questions that remain unanswered. Will the government immediately designate UK-made steel a nationally strategic produced iron? Will that form part of the UK's plans alongside protecting the production of virgin steel at Scunthorpe? When will the government bring forward a comprehensive plan to ensure that more British steel is used in vital infrastructure projects from defence to renewable energy? Will ministers work shoulder to shoulder with our European and Commonwealth partners to tear down trade barriers, including negotiating a customs union by 2030? Will the government develop initiatives to retrain and upskill workers across the country as we transition to greener methods of steel production? How does the government intend to respond to calls from UK Steel, which is calling for the government to achieve the lowest electricity prices in Europe, to achieve parity with competitors on network charges, and for wholesale electricity market reform? This case should also raise concerns, Mr. Speaker, about the role of Chinese corporate interests in the UK's national critical infrastructure. The decision by British Steel's Chinese owners to turn down the government's offer of £500 million of support to support the future of the Scunthorpe plant has directly precipitated the current crisis. We must now be clear-eyed about the potential risks posed by Chinese involvement in our country's vital infrastructure. To that end, can the Minister tell the House when the government's promised UK-China audit will be released, and as part of that articulate how the government plans to strengthen protections for critical infrastructure? Can the Minister also assure the House that the government has made an assessment of whether there is any risk that Xinye, on behalf of the Chinese government, has deliberately sought to run down the plant and jeopardise the UK's capacity to produce steel? Mr. Speaker, we are in a precarious position, and it is not as if the warnings weren't there. In 2022, the defence think tank RUSI said, domestically produced steel is used in defence applications, and offshoring the supply chain may have security implications. For example, in a scenario where multiple allied countries rearm simultaneously at a time of global supply disruption, such as during a major geopolitical confrontation. The fact that Xinye has now closed down the supply of raw materials is further evidence that it should never have been sold to them in the first place. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, the fact that it is some Conservative MPs calling for a nationalisation really shows just how through the looking glass we really are. It is abundantly clear, isn't it, that as far as the Conservatives are concerned, on national security, they cut troop numbers by 10,000. On food security, they undermined our farmers with unforgivably bad trade deals. And on economic security, they have left our country with almost no sovereign steel capacity. The Conservatives left our island nation's security severely vulnerable, like flotsam in the sea, left passively bobbing up and down, or being bashed around by the tidal pools of international events. That's not correct, by the way. And as for the honourable members of the private limited company, Reform Limited, well, I think they have a bit of cheek to claim to support UK steelworkers whilst cheering on their pal President Trump, whose punishing trade war is putting those steelworkers' jobs at risk. Perhaps the company's directors who sit on these benches may want to come clean about whose side they are really Mr. Speaker, times and again we have seen the failures of an ad hoc piecemeal approach to industry across all of our sectors, from the failure of our water companies to the shocking state of our national housing and the dismal situation facing our health service too. For too long there has been no stability for these industries, which are constantly fixed on a short-term basis, only to the point where they are practically held together by bits of string and tape and the dedicated workers who still remain. We Liberal Democrats stand ready to help constructively bring about an outcome that delivers real change.
That's a problem. Diane Abbott.
Mr. Speaker, some of us today have been surprised to hear the opposition talk about a failure to prepare. The workers of Scunthorpe might say the opposition had 40 years to prepare and failed. British Steel's products are essential to industry, to this country's security, and to the delivery of major infrastructure programmes across the country, including in London. British Steel supplies Transport for London with the power rail London uses on the transport network, which is not currently manufactured anywhere else in the country. For railways like the Underground, power rail from British Steel is essential to the everyday operation of the service, which supports up to 4 million customer journeys each day. The closure of British Steel would have a very serious adverse effect on Transport for London services, as it would have a serious effect on projects up and down this country. So, above all, Transport for London believe in the importance of a UK-based supply chain for steel. Finally, everyone in this House understands that this bill is not about bringing steel into public ownership, whatever the opposition asserts. But some of us hope that moving on to nationalisation will not be ruled out. All of us on this side of the House believe in what works. But when it comes to privatisation, it certainly does not always work. The water industry comes to mind. Since privatisation, not a single reservoir has been built. Instead, billions have been poured into the pockets of shareholders. Now our waterways and rivers are floating with raw sewage, and it is the consumer that will have to pay exorbitant charges going forward for investment that should have been made all along. So this House supports the government in moving to save British Steel and to save the jobs of thousands and thousands of workers. And this House supports the government in moving so quickly and with such certainty to protect this country's interests, to protect its interests in relation to security, and also to work to save the community in Scunthorpe. Because one of the issues about deindustrialisation is the long-term effect on many communities up and down the country. So we all support what the government is doing.
Edward Lee.
I've just come off the phone talking to Tom Smith, the convener, trade union convener at the blast furnaces, on behalf of my many constituents who work in Scunthorpe next door. And my primary concern today is with the nearly 3,000 people who work in this plant. Let's be clear, we have been making the best quality steel in the world for 135 years in Lincolnshire, and we intend to go on doing it. We are not going to allow cheap, inferior Chinese steel to kill off our industry. The workers of Scunthorpe are breathing a sigh of relief. Now, we can be party political. I have to say, I thought the chair of the Business Committee made an excellent speech just now. He was positive. He talked in strategic terms. I don't know what the Liberal Democrat spokesman achieved by constantly attacking the Conservative Party in what is a very complex issue. Of course, we can be criticised because we sold this company to Jingay. Yes, I agree. But how many voices over there were speaking up at the time? And were they speaking up when Greg Clark, our business secretary, paid the wages of the Scunthorpe steel workers for many months? Were they speaking up when we saved Sheffield Forge Masters? This is a highly complex issue, and we should be working together. So I support this bill. Now, I know that we can be critical of the government. Perhaps we should have acted sooner. And my honourable friend has been raising this point. I was sitting beside him when he raised it at the end of March, and he called for nationalisation of this industry. But we've now got to work together to save our steel-making capacity. But this is a bit of a sticking plaster, we know that. It's quite dangerous. Quite extensive powers have been taken by government. There has to be a sunset clause. We are given unprecedented powers to government. We can criticise them for not acting sooner. But this is just a sticking plaster on a gaping wound. Let's be honest. Steel making in this country is under extreme stress. And why is that? Why are we loading the most expensive energy costs on our own steel production? Why are we paying, why is Scunthorpe paying almost twice as much in energy costs as in South Korea or in America? High energy prices make UK steel expensive to produce and uncompetitive versus our European counterparts. The average price paid by UK steelmakers for 24-25 was £66 a megawatt hour, compared with the German price of 50 and the French price of 43. We are making our own steel industry uncompetitive. We have to stop these green energy costs. We have to be realistic. I see that the Secretary of State for Net Zero has now left. But get real. You know, we can take it into public ownership now, but if we go on loading these costs in our industry, we will be coming back month after month, year after year. So, we will support this bill. We want a sunset clause. But we have to get real about China too. Was it not obvious for weeks, indeed for months, that this company, this so-called private company, there is no such thing as a private company in China. They're all under the cosh of the government, under an autocratic regime. What do they care about the steel workers in Scunthorpe? What do they care about our national interest? So never again, colleagues, must we allow a strategic industry like this to fall into the hands of the Chinese, the Russians, or anybody else. I'm going to give way. I'm going to finish in a moment. I've made my point. So, just try and... Oh, I'll give way to the Honourable Lady. Go on.
I am extremely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I would just like to ask him to clarify whether he was aware that the Chinese company that is now in possession of British Steel was actually sold it by a Conservative government of which he was a part.
Well, of course I'm aware, because I've just said it. I've just admitted that it was a mistake, but I've asked everybody here, what were they saying at the time? Of course, silence. Silence! It's easy to be wise after the event, but I'm worried about my steel workers. I'm worried about their future. I'm not worried. Of course, our former leader, yes.
I just want to make sure he puts the record straight. Some of us on this side warned the government then it was the wrong act.
Well done. Very well. Some of us apparently warned the government. I don't know how many, but we now know what is the true nature of our Chinese friends. So, we support the bill. Let's make our steel industry really competitive again. Let's make Great Britain great again.
Can I just appeal to everybody? There's a lot who want to speak. There's going to be some disappointment. Those who actually are going to be affected, I think, should be allowed. But let's see how we can go for time. We need to be brief to get more members in. Let's have a good example. Melanie on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'm delighted to follow the honourable member for Gainsborough, who I think, with his Damascene conversion to socialism today, could be termed the new Red Ed. I welcome the decisive action from the government today, bringing security for workers at Scunthorpe, grasping the nettle after the can has been kicked down the road for far too long. British Steel at Scunthorpe is not just of interest to across northern Lincolnshire, to my constituents of Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, whether directly or indirectly. The employment and training opportunities that come from that single site are so important to our local economy. And the product, of course, is nationally important. And if I think about the businesses operating across the Humber and northern Lincolnshire, the industries are relevant to securing The future of steel seems strong. From the Siemens factory in Gould to the boatyards of Hull and offshore turbines off the Cleethorpes coast, the products that Scunthorpe could have a role in producing are plain for us all to see. And those are the next steps the government must turn its attention to, because the measures today are not without risk. And unless we set a course for steel in the UK that closely aligns with our industrial strategy, this will only be another sticking plaster for a site that has already been put through the ringer too many times over the years. The powers the government seeks today will protect the workers at British Steel from any retaliatory measures that Jingye may have sought to take, which is welcome from those workers who have often felt at the mercy of the owners of the company and unseen by government. I give way to the honourable gentleman for Durham.
I thank the honourable lady for giving way. Will she agree with me that one of the major ways in which we could secure markets for British steel is by the British First strategy that the Ministry of Defence has stated for the building of future warships?
Rocker, has somebody texted a photograph out of here of what's going on? This morning. Okay, can people please not take photographs or text them? I don't know if it's the case, but your name's just been associated. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I agree with my honourable friend. It is imperative that we tie all of the initiatives that this government is bringing forward, whether that is in defence or in other critical areas of industry, to make sure that we can secure the future of steel for the long term. To ensure that it has the best chance of success to secure a private partner or long-term commercial solution, the government must take all actions available within its powers to do all it can to make British steel viable. So I wonder if now is the time for government perhaps to look again at CBAM. The EU has already brought in the adjustment mechanism to protect against international steel dumping. So doing all we can, whether it is keeping down energy costs, and as I know the Minister has sought to do, investment through the National Wealth Fund, or indeed bringing in the CBAM, this is our chance to have a genuine long-term solution for the preservation of British steel. Thank you.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my Member of Parliament. And on this matter, we are in complete harmony. But before I go on to talk about the local situation, which is what I want to focus on, can I thank the Secretary of State for giving me a call yesterday evening and outlining the proposals that he was bringing forward this morning. I did say to him that I wouldn't be entirely uncritical, so I'm sure he won't mind a few jabs here and there. The local situation is extremely critical, as has been pointed out. The impact not only on the workforce but on the wider economy of northern Lincolnshire would be extensive. I have been a resident in the Grimsby-Cleethorpes area all of my life, and I have seen the impact that can happen when a town loses its core industry. In the case of Grimsby, of course, that was the deep-sea fishing industry. But the reality is, when that happens, and it's happened to so many towns up and down the country as a result of the decline in mining, shipbuilding and other heavy industries, when that decline happens, it takes a generation or perhaps more for the town to fully recover. And the last thing I want to see in my neighbouring constituency of Scunthorpe, and to the hundreds of my constituents who work there, for members who weren't here for the Easter adjournment, there was a handful of you who might have heard me say this only 4 days ago, but the site extends not just within the bounds of Scunthorpe, but way beyond into my Brigg and Immingham constituency, and the site is actually the equivalent of 1,133 Wembley football pitches. So that gives you some idea of the size of the site and the amount of work that would be needed if the work works were to close, there would be demands for vast government investment over decades in order to remediate the site and to provide new employment. Now, as I said, I wouldn't be entirely uncritical of the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I would refer him back to my first urgent question, which was on the 5th of September last year. And I said in that debate, there have been widespread media reports suggesting that coke will stop being imported from October, which would mean production would stop in Scunthorpe by Christmas. There are rumours concerning the fact that employees will be given notice very soon. That is obviously creating great anxiety among those directly employed by British Steel and those in the supply chain, which in northern Lincolnshire extends to many thousands of people and businesses. Now, thankfully, we've had a 6-month reprieve from those threats which were coming forward in October. But I have to say that the government have been a little dilatory on this. I know that negotiations have been taking place, and I appreciate that ministers cannot give away their negotiating position. But having made that point as long ago as September, and then when, Mr. Speaker, you granted me an urgent question on the 27th of March, that's only a couple of weeks or so ago. And at that point, surely the government were beginning to realise that the negotiations with Jingay were going nowhere. Yes, I'll happily give way.
Very briefly, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely grateful for him putting that point on the record. It is precisely because of those concerns that we were able to have ready a legal route to intervene to directly offer support to purchase raw materials. What we couldn't have anticipated, what we wouldn't have expected, is a company acting in a rational economic manner when made such a clear, distinctive and generous offer.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for the intervention. I would merely respond to that by saying he's been party to the negotiations, and surely he must have realised that the company were not negotiating in good faith, and that he surely expected his officials to have got in place legislation that, if that was required, to deal with the situation that we now find ourselves in. As has been said by others, this is not just crucial for the thousands of my constituents who work there, but for the defence of the nation. And I would very much assume and hope that MOD ministers have been lobbying the Secretary of State, making very clear their concerns. Locally, there is continuing concern. I will be supporting, as indeed the Father of the House has outlined, these proposals. I floated the nationalisation issue on the 27th of March. I have to say I see this as a stepping stone to that situation, and to those who will perhaps be demanding nationalisation now, today, I would say, look, this is a very complex issue. What matters more than anything else is the future of the workforce and the ability to produce virgin steel. And nationalisation legislation would not, I sincerely hope, be passed in 3 hours. It would involve a great deal, but having got themselves into the situation they have, the government are now taking the right action. I have to say there has been some disappointment locally following my question to the Prime Minister only 10 days ago, when he didn't take up the option to meet a cross-party delegation of MPs to discuss the situation. That has been greeted with some disappointment, to put it mildly, at local level. But now we've got to where we are. I fully support the government. I hope they accept the sunset clause amendment, which I think would be prudent of them. But I can assure them that I give them my full support today, and will continue to do so when they act in the best interests of my constituents.
Yeah. Just before, can we try and help each other by not speaking? And I hope we've not got reams of paper in the next speech. Bill Esterson is a good example where it won't be a long speech.
Well, thank you. No pressure, Mr. Speaker. I'll put some of them down. Grateful to you. Mr Speaker, can I start by praising the Business Secretary and his team for the way in which they have brought forward this legislation. Can I add to that my praise for the trade unions, for local management and for members of Parliament of both main parties, not least our honourable friend, the member for Scunthorpe, who, being a minister, isn't, I think, speaking in this debate. I joined him on a 2023 visit to Scunthorpe, where the very concerns about Xinjiang that we've heard today were made to us by local management and trade unions alike, and it is no surprise that they have come to pass. The last government was warned, and they chose not to take the action needed. Ministers in the last government told me that steel needed by the Navy and across our economy couldn't be made at Scunthorpe or indeed at other steel plants. Interestingly, the local management and the trade unions told me that they could make whatever their customers asked them to make by adjusting production. It again is a pity that the last government didn't listen. We might be in a rather different place now. During the last Parliament, we were the only country in the G20 where production of primary steel and steel overall was falling. We would be the only country in the G20 without any primary steel making capacity if the blast furnaces were allowed to close. And I think that underlines why today's legislation is so important on its own. The steel at Scunthorpe is of strategic national importance. 95% of our rail is made at Scunthorpe. They make automotive, they make construction and defence products, all of which are critically important to this country. And if we add to what is made now, the opportunities in the energy transition in particular, and also in additional opportunities in defence, 25 million tonnes of steel are going to be required over the next 25 years in offshore wind alone. And these are great opportunities if we can secure the future at Scunthorpe. The Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee on Tuesday mentioned the grid connection plan for the Scunthorpe site is only due in 2034. Our electricity prices are 46% above the average for International Energy Authority states. The government has to address both of these challenges of slow grid connections and of uncompetitive industrial energy prices if it is to enable the modernisation of industry as a whole and steel in particular. Very happy.
Thank you. And thank you for giving way. As a member of the Business and Trade Committee, we've heard evidence about the importance of the steel industry and that primary steel making should be retained as a key pillar of the UK industrial sovereignty. We've heard that blast furnaces still play a critical role in the strategic and high-grade steel production. So does the member agree with me that our economic security is intrinsically linked with our onshore industrial capability and that our government's focus on both construction and defence in these uncertain times means that this bill is very welcome news?
Well, she makes the point extremely well that our economic security and our national security are two sides of the same coin, and I am very pleased to hear of the work being done by the Select Committee with the subcommittee that the Chair mentioned in his excellent speech earlier. And I want to talk about Port Talbot because the Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee visited there 2 weeks ago. There was a delay of several years, or there will be a delay of several years, between the closure last year of the blast furnaces and the opening of the new electric arc furnace. This is a massive cause for concern in South Wales and beyond. The excellent financial support by this government and willingness to engage by Tata is a very good example of how industry and government should be partners, and it's an indication of how the plans for the industrial strategy that the government is bringing forward can already and are already being effective. Mr Choke, the bill today gives the government the opportunity to secure steelmaking in this country. I congratulate my right honourable friend and his colleagues on the decisive action he is taking. Workers and the nation as a whole are grateful for the work of this government. They are doing absolutely the right thing.
Mr. Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, my honourable friend, the member for Clacton, and I have been calling for British Steel to be a strategic national corporation for some 6 years. We said to this previous administration, we said the last thing they should do is sell it to the Chinese, but they ignored our splendid advice, because what this requires is long-term investment. The problem, as we all know, is that it's been beset by short-termism, short-term thinking, and of course by the vast energy costs in this country, electricity costs, partly caused by net stupid zero and the carbon tariffs. But now is a great opportunity that the House should unify behind, because actually we have the opportunity, as the Secretary of State confirmed, to take this into public ownership, and we would urge this weekend, for the sum of £1, we could do a great deal for the taxpayer. We should invest in refurbishing and relining these blast furnaces in the same way the French are doing in just Dunkirk. They're spending €250,000 in Dunkirk, so we should do the same. We should bring in excellent global expertise to help British Steel. And if we do those things, if we have long-term procurement contracts on the raw materials, including the opportunity to use our own British coal from Cumbria that this government declined, that would create more jobs and it would save transport costs, including the opportunity for long-term procurement contracts for the products that British Steel produces. These are the opportunities, how you make a long-term, viable business for British Steel, for the taxpayer. You can bring in long-term patient capital. If we do these things, then everything that we want, which is that actually primary steelmaking is a vital strategic asset. Scunthorpe can be the home, the epicentre of this. So what I would urge this government, actually, we will support this government in this bill today, but I think there's an opportunity, Secretary of State, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to go further, to be bold, be courageous, show your cojones, show some mettle, Mr. Secretary of State. This weekend, Mr. Secretary of State, you have the opportunity. You have the opportunity, Secretary of State, and this government to go for it, to put the misery, to put the uncertainty of 3,000 plus families in Scunthorpe, to reduce and remove that uncertainty. Let's go for it. Let's nationalise British Steel this weekend and make British Steel great again. Thank you.
Carolyn Harris.
I represent not only my constituents in East and Swans East, but those of my good friend, the member for Aberfan, Maesteg. After years of underinvestment and neglect by the previous government, this government's commitment to steel is truly welcome. However, it is vital that the £2.5 million Steel Renewal Fund, already announced by the government, is used to support the industry across the UK, and that Wales needs to get its fair share. 2,800 steel workers lost their jobs in the region, and they recognise the circumstances in Port Talbot were different to Scunthorpe. Half the steel production had already been shut down when the Labour government came into power, despite Plaid Cymru's desperate attempts to electioneer this as an issue. It was impossible to... No, I will not. It is impossible to reverse the deal that had already been struck between the previous Tory government and Tata. But whilst they understand the urgency of the current situation and support the government's action to prevent further closures and job losses, they do need a commitment for Wales. Commitments that will attract investment and create much-needed employment opportunities, like that being offered by the floating offshore wind company. It was too late to save the furnaces in Port Talbot. The jobs are long gone, but investment in the area will bring new jobs and, most importantly, new hope to all our constituents.
Sir David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You will not need reminding, but I will remind the House of quite what an unusual day this is for a variety of reasons. The last time we met on a Saturday, it was in time of war, And the last time we put a bill through in one day, it was the beginning of the pandemic. So that's how serious the disastrous circumstance we find ourselves in, how serious those circumstances are. I'm assuming, frankly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this House is going to accept this bill today. So I'm going to address my comments directly at the Secretary of State. It is a nationalisation in all but name bill at one level in terms of the powers it gives. Indeed, it actually gives more powers than a nationalisation bill. It will allow the government to do things that it couldn't do under a nationalisation bill. I frankly would have voted for one. I'm not a fan of nationalisation, as you all know. I would have voted for nationalisation. I will vote for this bill for a simple reason. This buys us time. It's a reprieve, not a rescue. I think that's what people have to understand. And I say this to the Honourable Gentleman for Boston and Skegness. I don't agree with him in terms of his strategic nationalisation argument. Nationalisation under these circumstances buys the Secretary of State time and leverage. And he needs to be able to make his own judgment as to when he exercises that time and leverage. We got just a hint of a view of how complex this game that that Yingya are playing is. And in fact, if anything, if I were going to recommend an amendment to the bill, it would be to limit the amount of money, i.e. to 1 penny, that the government could pay to Yingya, because then the government couldn't, no court could challenge it, and they would know full well they're not online to make money out of the British taxpayer. So I think we have to look at it in strategic and tactical terms, in terms of what we're trying to do. Will she forgive me? I think lots of people are trying to get in. I'm going to refer to something she said in a minute. If she really needs to come in, I'll let her in there. But so we're trying to manage a disaster for Scunthorpe, which is local to me, as he knows, and my community, members of my community work at Scunthorpe. The knock-on in economic effects will be much bigger than one town. It will be thousands upon thousands of people all around. And of course a disaster as well for our last primary steelmaker. And that has suddenly become more important. I mean, it was always important. It was always an important part of national strategy. But Mr. Trump has made it a vital piece, an unavoidable piece of national strategy. And we have to create a circumstance for the Secretary of State and for the government which allows us to manoeuvre through that. Now that does mean, as people have said already, an energy policy that makes this operation viable. Now, not just viable when it's owned by the state, viable, commercially viable. It means, and that means an energy policy which is not the highest energy costs of our competitors, which where it is now. It also means we have to think very hard about carbon supply. At the moment, the technology does not exist to make primary steel without carbon supply, so we have to think about that too. And that actually is a strategic supply, so we can't rely on another country for it. And what I want to see is this bill used in a way which gives him the time to deliver on that, but which gives this House the right to see what he's doing, the right to see how the strategies are turning out, because nobody has got this right. I mean, if the government benches want me to, I can go back to 1997 and park blame if they really want to, but I don't want to do that today. I want to make this viable. So we have to get our energy, our environment, and our industrial policies all in line to make this work. To put it in context, last year, British Steel lost, I think, about 408 million pounds. That was the September number. This year, it's about 250 million. Neither of them are small amounts of money, and the Treasury would shut down an operation if we just left something like that inside the government for very long. So we need a new strategy that cuts our carbon emissions without exporting the industries to the rest of the world. And that's, I'm afraid, most of our successes in carbon reduction in this last decade or two or three have been by dint of exporting the industry, often to countries with much worse records than us. In this case, it would be China. They have 50% of the world market already. They have massive excess in terms of steel capacity, and their steel capacity is the most carbon inefficient there is. So we're actually worsening the circumstance. Briefly, quickly, please.
Very briefly, our committee has taken very clear evidence that we need a carbon border adjustment mechanism so that actually carbon-rich steel like that from China is taxed much more heavily. But crucially, what's needed on the table now are the steel safeguards from the Trade Remedy Authority to guard our markets from a flood tide of Chinese steel right now.
Yeah, I'm afraid he's right. I mean, and the difficulty is we're in a new world in this. I mean, the entire trade. I mean, the terrible thing that the House will only ever hear me say this once. But Trump has a small point in some respects, and we have to deal with the world as it is. Now, can I come to the sunset clause with the Secretary of State? I can imagine the instinct is not to put a sunset clause in because in dealing with a difficult negotiator like this, you're putting a backstop. And whenever you put a backstop on yourself, you give your other side a negotiating advantage. Can I say this to him? He mentioned in his opening speech that the Civil Contingencies Bill would be a route, right? For the House, who won't have read it, we spent a year putting it in place under the Blair government. It's got recourse to Parliament at every turn. Ministers are properly controlled. It has to be transparent and so on. What I might suggest to him is if at some point he organises a transition to that so the House has greater control. The COVID bill didn't have that. It missed all those defences, and look what happened to the policy as a result. So that's what I would like to see. Recourse to Parliament. Actions that he takes to manage the survival of Scunthorpe, policies to ensure its viability, and in post-Putin Trump era, security of supply. All of these things we want to see, and we can organise legislation to permit that. So I ask him, take the House into his confidence and do this properly.
Chris MacDonald.
In 1976, a group of steelworkers emerged from the Templeborough Steelworks following a night shift. That at the time was the largest electric arc steelmaking plant in the world. And they'd just done something rather spectacular. They'd broken a shift record. What they were really surprised to find was a letter from the Prime Minister, Sir Jim Callaghan, congratulating them for their contribution to the national effort. I think after 48 years, it is marvellous to see that we finally have a Prime Minister that's prioritising the steel industry once again. Now, I know what it's like to emerge bleary-eyed after a night shift on a steelworks, and as much as we're emotionally attached to our steelworks, the past analogies are not entirely helpful here, because there is too much of a narrative in this country that steel is a sunset industry, when in fact it is not only essential but advanced. And perhaps this is a time for me to direct members to my register of interest as the former chief executive of the UK's National Steel Innovation Centre. And a lot of that innovation is embedded in our facility in Scunthorpe. Advanced high-speed rail from the rail mail rods that are drawn down to wire the thickness of a human hair, produced to pharmaceutical levels of precision. The beam mill in Teesside, one of a handful of plants capable of producing large-scale beams that have built buildings from Hong Kong through to the west coast of the USA. And of course the Skinning Grove works as well, that produces the tines for yellow goods for Caterpillar that move directly into that factory. I think all members agree how vital these plants and facilities are, but you might be unaware, or members may be unaware, that the steels that we're producing today, two-thirds of them didn't exist 15 years ago. This is the level of continuous innovation in the steel industry. Everything that we have is made either from or with steel. Our steel industry has declined so significantly over the last 14 years that when I visited the Hartlepool pipe mill in the adjacent constituency to mine just last week, where they're making the pipes for the carbon capture and storage network that this government has invested £4 billion in, stamped on the plates of steel were the words Voestalpine, an Austrian steel producer that sits in the foothills of the Alps, and yet is able to produce plate steel more competitively than in the UK, whilst we have a plate mill in Scotland that is practically idle, and the slabs for that plate mill would have been produced in the Scunthorpe Steelworks. So I welcome the legislation today as an opportunity for us to take back control of our steel industry and to deal with the chaotic fragmentation of the industry that occurred over the last 14 years, because I believe that the UK can be just as competitive as a steel company in Austria or in Germany or France or Spain or the Netherlands, who are in fact our biggest importers to steel in the UK. I'm sorry, given the shortage of time. But I also believe that we can be at least as good as the steel industry in Belgium, which is now larger than the steel industry in the UK. And clearly that's a lack of ambition that the previous government had, that they did not believe that the UK could be as competitive as the steel industry in Belgium. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give way simply because there is a lack of time. I feel it is also important to correct the record for a number of comments that have been made earlier. The member for Boston and Skegness and others referred to the call from the West Cumbria mine. I must inform the House the management of British Steel have ruled this call out on the grounds of quality. The sulphur levels are too high. I'd be quite happy to talk to him about steel desulfurisation in the tea room later, if he would care to join me today.